I'm going to be reading a bit more from The Legend of Podkin One Ear with kind permission from Children's Favour. It's written by Kieran Larwood and illustrated by David Wyatt. And I'm going to be reading from chapter 15, which is where Podkin is fighting Scramashank, the leader of the Gorm. So let's see what happens. Fight me then, smell a skank, and you'll see what real rabbits are made of. Or run me down with your stupid iron monster. I don't care. I am Podkin, son of Lopkin, chieftain of Munbury Warren, and you are nothing but a fat, stinking coward. With the fiercest roar he could manage, he launched himself at Scramashank's mount and began whacking his dagger against its head armour, just below the thing's left eye. Clang, clang, clang. Scramashank stared down at him, bemused. Your knife doesn't cut through iron, idiot, he said. You won't be able to kill my beast like that. Podkin ignored him and kept on striking. I'm not trying to kill it, clang. I'm just clang, showing clang. My friend where to throw, clang, his spear. There was a whistling sound, followed by a wet, squidgy thunk. 1 second the beast was glaring down at the frenzied Podkin. The next, there was a 2-metre-long ash spear jutting out of its eye socket. With a strangled yelp, it collapsed to the floor, sending Scramashank toppling into the snow. There was a cheer from Podkin's family and the prisoners behind them, which was quickly cut off by the other Gorm raising their own spears. That, and the horrible sight of Scramashank rising slowly, unstoppably, to his feet again. His red eyes flashing, the Gorm Lord came striding around the body of his dead mount. In his hands was a huge broadsword, and he looked more terrifying and murderous than any rabbit ever has before or since. Oh, whiskers, Podkin thought. What shall I do now? In his imagination, Scramashank should have been trapped underneath the iron beast, and then they could have somehow all run away. He never thought he'd actually have to fight the monster. Remember, a voice rang in his head. It sounded a lot like his father, that gentle lecturing voice he used when he was trying to tell Podkin how to be a good chieftain. Remember what Crom taught you. You can't cut his armour, but you can block a little, and you're much smaller and faster. Now, quick, duck, roll, jump. Podkin didn't need to be told twice. With a yelp, he dived right between the legs of Scramashank and rolled out the other side, ducking low as the Gorm Lord swung his sword round behind. Armour clanked and Scramashank spun to face Podkin. Pod flipped backwards out of reach and the sword thudded into the ground. You can't jump around forever, rat maggot. Scramashank sounded almost amused, sure of his eventual victory. Soon you will get tired, and then I will peel you like a parsnip. Not yet, you won't. Podkin dashed left and right. He hopped and sidestepped and feinted, all the while keeping just out of reach of the deadly sword blade. From the corner of his eye, he could see Crom and Paz hefting their weapons, ready to jump in and come to his aid. Boots. That voice again, only this time more urgent. He rolled under a particularly low sword swipe, wondering what his mind was telling him. Boots? What about them? And then it came to him. Scramashank's boots weren't iron. They were leather. Big, black, leather boots. That meant Starclaw could... He just happened to be standing between the Gorm Lord's legs. Without a second thought, he swung the dagger sideways, aiming for the spot above Scramashank's ankle. It swished through as if it were nothing more than a blade of grass. There was a roar of agony somewhere above his head, and something splattered all over the snow, crimson on white. Podkin smelt a hot iron stink and heard the hiss of rapidly melting ice. Blood, he thought, and then Scramashank collapsed in a heap, clutching his leg and screaming so loud it hurt Podkin's ears. For the first time, he sounded like a real animal. The little rabbit looked up to see the rest of the Gorm riders turning towards him, spears raised. This is it, he thought. I'm going to be skewered like a hedgehog. But instead there was an explosion from the direction of the iron pillar. A flower of orange light and a roar that drowned out Scramershank's howls. It was followed by another and another. The glare made Podkin's eyes water. The noise rang in his ear. For a moment he thought the world was ending. Then he saw Mish and Mash running amongst the Gorm, waving lit torches and shouting. Of course, Podkin realised. Bang dust. Their plan was to blow up the Gorm camp. His friends weren't fleeing, they were setting up bombs. The effect on the Gorm mounts was dramatic. With their riders clinging on for dear life, they turned and stampeded across the camp, crashing into each other with great clangs of iron. Well done, little one. Crom was beside him, one big paw on his shoulder and his sword drawn. But we're not safe yet. Wait! Mish was pointing out of the camp in the direction of the hill, where they had left Bridget the witch and Puck. What's that? All eyes turned up the hillside, where the silhouette of a tall, robed rabbit could be seen, her arms raised high. Bridget! As they watched, a bank of rolling mist swept up behind her like a cresting wave and then crashed onto the hillside, flowing up and over the camp walls and covering everything within. Podkin and the others stood transfixed as the fog washed over them. It was cool and sweet, and Pod could smell fresh pine sap, spring leaves and summer dew all mixed into one. But the Gorm weren't so keen. As soon as the mist touched them, they fell to the ground, choking, gasping and clutching their throats. Their already terrified beasts toppled over, trampling and crushing them into the snow. Podkin looked across to where the iron pillar stood, now lopsided after Mish and Mash's blast of bang dust. He thought he saw it writhing and twisting. As the fog continued to wash over them, he might have seen the soil around the pillar burst open with bright green roots and brambles that reached up their thick, hungry tendrils to wrap it and drag it down under the wet, dark earth. Whatever actually happened, when the mist cleared a little, the horrid thing had gone, leaving nothing but a scar on the ground. And then Paz was shaking him, shouting in his face, "Podkin, you were amazing, just like a real chieftain." She grabbed him in a quick, fierce hug, and then there was a blur of everything happening at once. The prisoners were properly awake now, all running for the camp gates, with Mish and Mash trying to herd them in the right direction. Crom had Podkin's mother under one arm, his aunt under the other. At some point, Bridget and Puck had come down the hill. There they were, holding hands with Mish and running along with everyone else. Someone had brought over the wagon tethered to the mangy rat, and they were loading it with the prisoners too sick to walk, and then they were all running and stumbling out of the camp and back in the direction of the forest. Podkin looked back, still not sure whether he was dreaming. Scramershank had stopped moving, passed out cold. The body of his iron beast was nearby, and on the ground in front of Pod, his boot complete with foot inside. I should probably take that with me, Podkin thought, half in a daze. Might be lucky. Did I really do that? He managed to say. You did, little brother. Podkin looked up to see Paz gazing back at him proudly. It was the first time he could remember her looking at him like that. Don't let it go to your head, though, she added. You're still an annoying little weasel brain. His mother safe, his father avenged, a new home waiting for them all in the forest. Podkin's feet were as light as moonbeams, and his grin as bright as starlight as he sheathed his magic dagger and ran south with his sister beside him, both of them faster than the wind. And I'm going to carry on to chapter 16, which is the last chapter, and it's called The End of the Beginning. The bard finished speaking. He placed his hands together and bows, the sign that the story is done. At first, little rabbits cheer, happy that Podkin has triumphed, and the adults around the room clap. But then the questions begin, tumbling out one over another as the rabbits rush to speak. What happened next? Was Scramershank dead? Was Podkin's mother all right? Was that the end of the Gorm? Did they all go back to Dark Hollow? The bard lets the questions wash over him before raising his hands. Gradually, the little rabbits stop chirping and sit in silence again. Those are all good questions, he says. But the stories that answer them are for another night. I believe it's time for little ones to be abed, or the midwinter rabbit won't be visiting this warren. Will you be here tomorrow night? One tired rabbit asks. The bard looks over at Chief Hubert, who claps his hands and nods his head, smiling broadly. It appears I will, says the bard, and perhaps a few nights longer, at least until the winter solstice is done. The little rabbits cheer, and one by one get up from the hearth and go to find their parents. In the end, just two are left, the inquisitive rabbit and the sensible one. I still don't get it, said the inquisitive rabbit. All the stories about Podkin, about how brave and strong and powerful he was. In your one, he was just a scared little rabbit, just like one of us. That, says the bard, is exactly what he was, just like one of you. You don't have to be brave or strong or powerful to do incredible things. And what's the point, the little rabbit continues, of just telling that bit of the story? I want to hear about Podkin's ragtag army, how he beats the Gorm for good, forever, and everything else. Stories have beginnings. They have middles and they have endings, said the bard. That was just the end of the beginning. Well, I think it was a good story, says the sensible rabbit. The bard smiles his thanks. A very good story. Kind of you to say so. It was realistic. I like to think so. It was very realistic, almost too realistic. Are you getting to a point? The bard asks. Only I'd like a flagon or two of mead now and perhaps some more soup. My point, says the sensible rabbit, is that you know an awful lot of details about Podkin. More than anyone should know unless they were actually there. What are you saying? Says the bard, a mischievous smile playing on his face. The inquisitive rabbit's eyes turn as wide as soup bowls. What? Really? Do you think the bard is Podkin? Do you think Podkin's become a wandering storyteller? The bard doesn't say a word. Well, said the sensible rabbit, he hasn't taken his hood off since he got here. Why else would he keep it on unless he's hiding his missing ear? The bard gives a chuckle and reaches up for his hood. The two rabbits hold their breath as he pulls it back to reveal two normal ears, tattooed in blue swirls, just like the rest of his dyed fur. I'm flattered that you think I could be Podkin, says the bard, but I'm afraid I'm not he. The story was told to me, and my bard's memory filled it with little things that made it real, everyday details, feelings and sensations, nothing but a piece of storytelling magic. The sensible rabbit's face falls, and his friend punches him lightly on the arm for being so stupid. Despite their blushes, the two disappointed rabbits remember to say their goodnights and shuffle off to sleep in their burrows. The bard receives a hearty slap on the back from Hubert and a fresh flagon of mead, and then makes his way to the edge of the long burrow. The musicians have the fireside now, and it's time for the parents to dance the bramble reel and sing the old songs. No place for an aging storyteller. He picks his way through the shadows until he finds a bench tucked away in an alcove. There is already another rabbit there, an old one, sitting whittling a piece of wood by the light of a candle. The bard takes a seat next to him and raises his flagon in a toast. Midwinter blessings. And to you, says the old rabbit. Nice story. Thank you, says the bard. You didn't have to make me sound like such a brat, though. The bard looked at the aged, wrinkled rabbit with his greying fur and wispy beard. He takes in his watery eyes, trembling hands, and the faint marks of old scars here and there. He looks like any ancient old warrior that could be found in any corner of any warren throughout the whole 5 realms. Except he isn't. The bard laughs and pulls his older brother to him in a fierce hug, careful not to dislodge the false ear that was tied to the side of his head. Your memory is fading, Pod. You were the biggest brat of all. I suppose I was. I'm glad to see you, Puck. I'm glad to see you too. It's been too many midwinters. That it has. The two brothers sit together then, listening in silence as the music fills the long burrow and the singing and dancing run on into the night. They sit and hold hands and think about midwinters past, the stories in between, and how, on a night like this, once upon a time, everything changed forever. And that is the end of the legend of Podkin One Ear. Thanks for listening.